Hey, Jeff, you know I cannot appoint anybody. Huh? I can't appoint anybody.
They're unplugged.
Everybody I've appointed, their time is expired.
U.S. President Donald Trump was caught on a hot mic expressing frustration over Republican delays blocking his U.S. attorney appointments. The leaked audio captured Trump saying he can't appoint anybody as journalists cleared the room after a White House event. He complained that nominees' terms expire before confirmation, leaving key posts vacant and weakening his administration.
Thank you, press. Let's go. Let's go. Thank you. Thank you, press. Keep going. Keep going. I know. Thank you.
Hey, Jeff, you know I cannot appoint anybody. Huh? I can't appoint anybody.
They're unplugged.
Everybody I've appointed, their time is expired. And then they're in default. And then we're losing patience.
All right, friends. Welcome back to Dr. John Podcast Family. Representative John Larson introduced a 13-article impeachment resolution on April 6, 2026, spanning foreign policy misconduct, domestic military deployments, and abuse of constitutional authority. The comprehensive filing marks the most recent and broadest formal challenge to Trump's presidency since his return to the White House. The context surrounding this filing couldn't be more explosive. Trump's recent threat to wipe out an entire civilization in Iran has ignited a political firestorm that shows no signs of cooling down. His words, the kind of apocalyptic rhetoric that would have ended any previous presidency, have sparked intense debate over his mental fitness and triggered a wave of calls for his removal from office.
Meanwhile, speaking to reporters, Trump attacked the Senate blue slip tradition, calling it a horrible barrier to appointments. He called on Judiciary Committee Chair Chuck Grassley to end the practice and accused Republicans of failing to act decisively. Trump argued that even highly qualified nominees are being stalled because one home state senator can block the process. He said Democrats exploit the rule to reject his choices, forcing him to recycle temporary appointees every few months. Trump warned that the delays were causing the administration to lose a lot of great people across the federal system. Earlier, GOP Senator Chuck Grassley defended the century-old blue slip tradition after President Trump blasted the process online. Trump said that Grassley could end what he called the blue slip problem with a simple signature. The system, used since 1917, lets home state senators approve or block federal judge nominees on a blue form.
Last night, I was surprised to see
The pressure on Trump is increasing in Washington even after the sudden announcement of a 2-week ceasefire with Iran. More than 85 Democratic lawmakers have now called for action against the American president, with some urging impeachment and others pushing for the invocation of the 25th Amendment. Remember, many Democrats have made it clear that their demands are not going away. This isn't a flash in the pan. This is a sustained, organized pressure campaign that has only intensified, despite the temporary truce with Iran. Let me be precise about what these 13 articles actually cover, because the specific breadth here deserves attention. Larson's resolution accuses Trump of high crimes and misdemeanors tied to conduct in Iran, Venezuela, and Gaza.
President Trump on Truth Social go after me and Senate Republicans over what we call the blue slip. Now, to people in the real America, not here in this Washington, D.C., an island surrounded by reality, the people in real America don't care about what the blue slip is, but in fact it impacts in their states the district judges who serve their communities and the U.S. attorneys who ensure the law and order is enforced. I was offended by what the president said, and I'm disappointed that it would result in personal insults.
Trump's complaints intensified after his pick for U.S. Attorney in New Jersey, Alina Habba, was blocked by state Democrats. Habba had already been under scrutiny after a federal court ruled. She remained in the role longer than allowed by law.
These are the foreign policy fronts this series has covered extensively across our Iran war and Hegseth testimony scripts. Alongside those international allegations, the resolution includes articles about National Guard deployments in American cities, connecting directly to the civil-military tension this series traced through the 6 veterans' PSA and the Quantico Training Grounds comments. And perhaps most significantly for constitutional scholars, the resolution includes allegations about Trump's use of the pardon power, one of the most historically contested areas of presidential authority. 13 articles is a genuinely large number for a single resolution. Most prior impeachment filings this series has covered have contained considerably fewer specific counts, meaning Larson's filing represents an attempt to consolidate an unusually wide range of alleged misconduct into one comprehensive document.
A district judge later ruled Habba had been serving unlawfully, deepening confusion in New Jersey's federal courts. This month, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals disqualified her entirely, citing a need for clarity and stability. Trump referenced the turmoil while insisting the Senate system was failing to support his judicial and attorney picks.
Yeah, Alina Habba says she's stepping down as U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey after the courts disqualified her. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, she's not disqualified. You've got a blue slip thing that's horrible. It's a horrible thing. It makes it impossible to appoint a judge or a U.S. attorney, and it's a shame. And the Republicans should be ashamed of themselves that they allowed this to go on, because I can't appoint a U.S. attorney that's not a Democrat, because they put a block on it. So if you appoint in Virginia or in New Jersey or in California a U.S. attorney or a judge, I mean, a judge situation is ridiculous. The only people that you can get by are Democrats, because they will put a hold on it. If I put up George Washington and Abraham Lincoln to be U.S. attorney in New Jersey or to be U.S. attorney in Virginia, we have Democrat senators, they will not approve them.
And here's the honest, necessary correction to the headline framing, delivered the way this channel always delivers it. USA Today itself specifically describes this effort as a long shot, given that Republicans control both the House and Senate. And notably, even many Democrats aren't fully united behind this latest specific push. That's a crucial detail. This isn't simply Republicans blocking a unified Democratic effort. It's a resolution that hasn't even achieved full consensus within the party most likely to support it, which tells you something important about where this specific filing actually stands in terms of realistic momentum. This isn't the first attempt during his return presidency either, and understanding that broader pattern matters. Larson's move follows earlier impeachment resolutions in this same Congress, specifically HRES 353 from 2025.
And this is a gentleman's agreement that's lasted for too long. And it doesn't make it, especially in light of what's going on today, it means you can't appoint a Republican U.S. attorney, and we don't play the same game with them, but they do. And I hope that somebody speaks to Senator Grassley about doing something about the blue slip, because I'm telling you, John, I put up great people, top people, highest education, the best lawyers to be like U.S. attorney. And both senators, it only takes one, but if they're Democrat senators, they say we're not going to approve it. I had a couple of them say, why don't you appoint Democrats? All because Senator Grassley, with his blue slip stuff, will not let anybody go by. By the way, the Democrats have violated the blue slip provision on numerous occasions, but we don't do it. And what it means is, I guess I just have to keep appointing people for 3 months and then just appoint another one. And it's a very sad situation. We're losing a lot of great people. We have about 7 U.S. attorneys who are not going to be able to keep their jobs much longer because of the blue slip. Because unless
which laid out 7 separate articles covering obstruction of justice, usurpation of Congress's spending power, abuse of trade powers, First Amendment violations, bribery, and what the resolution specifically termed tyranny. That's a remarkably serious catalog of allegations on its own, and it predates Larson's newer, even broader 13-article version by roughly a year. As with essentially every prior filing this series has documented extensively, these newer articles fit a well-established pattern. Multiple impeachment resolutions get filed, and only some of them ever advance to actual hearings or floor votes. A distinction this series has emphasized repeatedly throughout our entire impeachment mechanics coverage. So here's the accurate framing, and it's worth stating clearly before we go any further. The idea that Trump's life is falling apart is best understood as commentary capturing a broader climate of legal peril, political isolation, and administrative chaos rather than describing any single decisive event actually unfolding. Impeachment articles have genuinely been filed. That's real and confirmed. Whether that filing on its own constitutes his life falling apart is a matter of framing and interpretation, not a settled fact about imminent removal. Let's take apart both the specific content of these articles and the broader pattern they fit into. The Iran, Venezuela, and Gaza allegations connect directly to material this series has documented extensively across multiple prior scripts. The Iran material specifically ties to the ultimatum, the strikes on nuclear facilities, Hegseth's sworn testimony about those strikes, and the broader war powers authorization debate this series traced through the Hegseth testimony script. The question of whether any of that military action was properly authorized under existing congressional authorizations for use of military force. Venezuela and Gaza represent additional foreign policy fronts this series hasn't covered in the same depth, but they fit the same general category: allegations that specific military or foreign policy actions exceeded constitutional or statutory authorization. Bundling three separate international fronts into a single impeachment filing represents an attempt to argue a pattern of executive overreach in foreign affairs generally, rather than treating any single military action as an isolated incident. The National Guard deployment allegations connect directly to the civil-military tension this series has documented in exhaustive detail. The 6 veteran lawmakers' PSA reminding troops of their duty to refuse illegal orders. Trump's furious, punishable by death response. The Quantico training grounds comments about using American cities for domestic deployment. Including this specific allegation in a formal impeachment article represents Congress formally and procedurally documenting concern about exactly the pattern this series has traced extensively: the blurring of lines between legitimate military readiness and domestic political enforcement. The pardon power allegation deserves particular attention because it touches one of the most historically contested areas of presidential authority. The pardon power is, by constitutional design, one of the most nearly absolute authorities the presidency holds. Courts have historically been extremely reluctant to constrain it precisely because the framers intended it to operate largely outside ordinary legal review. An impeachment article specifically targeting pardon power usage suggests the allegation isn't about the pardon power's existence, but about a specific pattern of its application, likely connecting to the broader pattern this series has documented regarding pardons potentially protecting allies or connected figures in ways that raise separation of powers or corruption concerns. Now, the HRES 353 predecessor deserves to be understood as the foundation Larson's newer filing builds upon. Its 7 articles covering obstruction of justice and usurpation of Congress's spending power connect directly to the impoundment concerns this series covered in our Raskin cross-examination and congressional hearing script. The fight over whether Trump could simply refuse to spend money Congress had already appropriated. Abuse of trade power connects directly to the tariff ruling this series has covered extensively, the 6-3 Supreme Court decision finding his emergency tariff authority illegal. First Amendment violations likely connects to the law firm punishment orders this series documented in detail, with federal judges specifically calling those orders grossly unconstitutional. Bribery is a specific serious constitutional category explicitly named in the Constitution's own impeachment clause alongside treason and high crimes. And tyranny, while not a formal legal term of art in the same sense as the others, represents a summary characterization Congress members have chosen to attach formally to a broader pattern of allegations. The honest, careful treatment of why none of this constitutes an imminent removal threat requires acknowledging the specific constitutional mechanics this series has built an extensive, precise framework for across multiple prior scripts. A simple majority in the House must first approve at least one article before anything else can happen, and that alone requires either Republican defection at scale or a change in which party controls the chamber. Then, even if that first hurdle is cleared, the Senate must convict by a 2/3 supermajority. The same historically unmet threshold this series has documented in exhaustive vote-by-vote detail across our earlier scripts covering both of Trump's actual completed impeachments. With Republicans currently holding majorities in both chambers, that combined threshold remains, as reporters covering this specific filing emphasize, extremely difficult to reach. Difficult enough that even securing an actual House floor vote, let alone passage, represents a serious uphill climb before any Senate proceeding would even become relevant. Let me break down what this specific filing actually means once separated from the dramatized life falls apart framing. First, lock in the accurate characterization clearly. Impeachment articles have genuinely been filed twice now within the same Congress. First with 7 articles in HRES 353, and now with 13 broader articles in Larson's April 2026 resolution. That's real, confirmed, and worth taking seriously as a documented expression of formal congressional concern. It is not on its own evidence that removal is imminent or that Trump's presidency faces any immediate structural threat. Second, understand why the breadth of Larson's 13 articles spanning Iran, Venezuela, Gaza, domestic military deployment, and pardon power usage represents a deliberate attempt to consolidate this series' entire documented catalog of concerns into a single formal filing. Nearly every major thread this series has traced across dozens of scripts, the Iran war authorization questions, the civil-military tension, the emergency powers overreach pattern, appears reflected somewhere in either this filing or its HRES 353 predecessor. That suggests congressional Democrats have been formally documenting exactly the pattern this series has independently assembled through separate investigative scripts. The specific detail that even Democrats aren't fully united behind this latest push deserves serious attention because it's a meaningfully different situation than simple partisan gridlock. When the party most likely to support impeachment articles hasn't achieved full internal consensus, that suggests genuine strategic disagreement about timing, scope, or political wisdom, not merely Republican obstruction preventing an otherwise unified Democratic effort. That internal division is itself a data point about how far this specific filing sits from any realistic path toward an actual House vote. Connect the pardon power allegation to the broader accountability architecture this series has documented extensively because it represents Congress formally engaging with one of the most historically insulated areas of presidential authority. Whatever the specific factual basis for this particular article, its inclusion signals that concerns about pardon power usage have risen to the level of formal impeachment allegation, a genuinely significant escalation regardless of whether the underlying article ultimately advances anywhere. Recognize that this filing functions primarily as a messaging and pressure tool, exactly as reporters covering it have characterized it, rather than as a realistic near-term removal mechanism. This series has documented the exact dynamic across every prior impeachment mechanic script. Individual filings keep the word impeachment formally attached to a presidency's conduct, creating a permanent citable congressional record, even when the underlying vote counts make actual removal effectively impossible under current chamber composition. The life falls apart framing deserves to be understood precisely as commentary, characterizing a broader climate of internal administration infighting, unrest in places like Minnesota, mounting legal and political crisis arriving simultaneously, rather than describing this specific impeachment filing as a single decisive collapse event. This series has documented extensively across dozens of separate separate scripts, genuine legal and political pressure accumulating on multiple fronts simultaneously. The fraud judgment, the contempt findings, the tariff ruling, Bondi's actual firing, the Musk impeachment endorsement, Larson's filing as one more documented data point to that accumulating pressure without itself constituting the singular collapse the headline's dramatized framing implies. The honest boundaries restated because they're the entire point. Impeachment articles have genuinely been filed twice, with specific serious allegations spanning foreign policy, domestic military deployment, spending power, trade authority, First Amendment concerns, and pardon usage. Neither filing has advanced to an actual House floor vote as of the available reporting. The combined House majority, then Senate supermajority threshold required for actual removal remains. Per every documented historical precedent, this series has traced, extraordinarily difficult to achieve under current chamber composition. So here's the bottom line. Trump's life hasn't literally fallen apart because impeachment articles were filed against him. That's dramatized commentary layered onto a real confirmed but currently long-shot congressional action. It was genuinely real. Representative John Larson filed 13 separate articles of impeachment in April 2026 covering Iran, Venezuela, Gaza, domestic National Guard deployments, and pardon power usage, building on an earlier 7-article filing from 2025 that covered obstruction, spending power usurpation, trade power abuse, First Amendment violations, and bribery. USA Today itself calls this a long shot, not because the allegations lack seriousness, but because Republican control of both chambers and even incomplete Democratic unity make the actual constitutional threshold for removal extraordinarily difficult to reach. That's the accurate story. A real, serious, documented formal accusation functioning primarily as a pressure and messaging tool rather than an imminent path to removal, adding one more data point to the broader, genuinely accumulating pattern of legal and political pressure. This entire series has spent dozens of scripts documenting in precise, careful detail. There's a broader point worth making about why the specific expansion from HRES 353's 7 articles to Larson's 13 deserves to be understood as a meaningful escalation in scope, even though neither filing has advanced procedurally. The additional articles reflect an entire additional year of documented controversy this series has covered in real time. The original 7 articles filed in 2025 captured the earliest documented pattern of concerns: the impoundment fight, the tariff overreach, the law firm punishment orders. The newer 13 articles incorporate an entire additional year of subsequent developments. This series has traced extensively the Iran war's full arc from ultimatum through strikes through war powers, authorization debate, the National Guard deployment pattern that intensified specifically after the Quantico session, and the 6 veterans controversy, and evidently new material regarding pardon power usage that emerged sometime after the original filing. That expansion pattern, each successive impeachment filing, incorporating an additional year's worth of newly documented controversy, suggests something worth tracking going forward. If this pattern continues, any future impeachment filing will likely incorporate whatever additional controversies emerge between now and whenever the next resolution gets introduced, meaning the specific article count itself may function as a rough proxy for how much additional documented controversy has accumulated in the intervening period. It's also worth examining why the specific combination of foreign policy allegations, Iran, Venezuela, and Gaza together, represents a notably comprehensive attempt to characterize a pattern of foreign policy conduct as impeachable, rather than treating any single military action in isolation. This series has documented the Iran arc in the greatest depth of these 3 fronts, tracing the ultimatum, civilization will die tonight language, the actual strikes on nuclear facilities, Hegseth's sworn testimony about their effectiveness, and the broader removal wave that specific rhetoric triggered. Bundling Venezuela and Gaza alongside Iran into the same set of impeachment articles suggests congressional Democrats view these 3 fronts as sharing a common underlying pattern of unilateral military or foreign policy action exceeding what existing congressional authorizations actually permit, rather than treating each as an isolated, independently sufficiently justifiable exercise of presidential authority. Whether or not that characterization holds up to detailed legal scrutiny in each specific case, the decision to bundle all three together in a single formal congressional filing represents a meaningful assertion that the pattern examined collectively across all three fronts rises to the level of impeachable conduct. There's also a useful point worth making about how the internal Democratic disunity behind Larson's filing specifically connects to the broader strategic calculations this series has documented extensively regarding congressional Democrats' approach to Trump-related accountability efforts throughout this entire presidency. This series has traced across multiple prior scripts a consistent pattern of Democratic strategic disagreement about timing and framing for various accountability efforts, when to pursue impeachment versus other oversight mechanisms, how prominently to feature specific allegations, whether pursuing formal removal efforts that predictably fail actually serves the party's broader political interests, or instead risks appearing performative without producing tangible results. That internal debate isn't unique to Larson's specific filing. It reflects a genuine, ongoing strategic tension within the party about how to balance formal accountability efforts against the political cost of repeatedly pursuing formal mechanisms that current chamber composition makes essentially impossible to actually succeed at, regardless of how serious or well-documented the underlying allegations might be. It's worth applying the verification framework this series has built across every prior impeachment mechanic script to any future claims about this specific filing's progress, because a story involving fresh impeachment articles will likely generate its own embellished versions as commentary channels process the news. Ask whether any claimed advancement of Larson's specific resolution, a committee hearing, a floor vote, additional co-sponsors, is attributed to a specific verifiable congressional action, exactly the standard this series has applied throughout our entire impeachment mechanics coverage. Ask whether any claimed Democratic unity behind the filing beyond what current reporting documents is sourced to specific named members rather than assumed based on the resolution's mere existence. And recognize that this real confirmed filing, 13 serious articles building on 7 earlier ones covering foreign policy, domestic deployment, and pardon usage, is significant enough on its own documented terms, without requiring any exaggeration about its actual momentum or likelihood of success. Watch these specific developments going forward, because Larson's filing, like every other impeachment resolution this series has tracked, contains genuinely trackable next steps, distinct from any dramatized life falls apart framing. Watch whether the resolution receives any committee action beyond simple introduction, since that specific procedural step will represent genuine forward movement distinct from the filing stage it currently occupies. Watch whether additional House Democrats formally co-sponsor or publicly endorse the specific 13 articles, since that kind of growing formal support will represent a meaningful data point about whether the internal party disunity noted in current reporting is narrowing or persisting. And watch whether any future impeachment filing, if one emerges, further expands the article count beyond 13, since that pattern, if it continues, will represent additional documented controversy accumulating in whatever period separates this filing from any future one. Let's also spend time examining the specific bribery article inherited from HRES 353, because it deserves particular attention as one of only 2 categories the Constitution's own impeachment clause explicitly names alongside treason, distinct from the broader and more interpretively flexible high crimes and misdemeanors standard that covers most other allegations in both resolutions. Bribery, as a specifically named constitutional category, carries a more precise legal definition than the more elastic tyranny characterization or the broader First Amendment violations language. It typically requires demonstrating a specific exchange of official action for personal benefit, a considerably higher evidentiary bar than establishing a general pattern of concerning conduct. The inclusion of a bribery article specifically suggests the original HRES 353 drafters believed they had identified conduct meeting that more precise constitutional standard. though the available research material doesn't detail the specific factual allegations underlying that particular article. Its survival into Larson's newer expanded filing suggests the original drafter's confidence in that specific allegation persisted even as the broader resolution expanded to incorporate additional, more recent controversies. It's also worth considering why the National Guard deployment article deserves to be understood as potentially the most immediately actionable allegation in this entire expanded filing, given how directly it connects to ongoing documented conduct this series has traced in real time rather than historical conduct requiring retrospective legal analysis. The Iran, Venezuela, and Gaza allegations largely concern completed military actions whose legality would need to be assessed against events that already occurred. The National Guard deployment concern, by contrast, connects to an ongoing pattern of domestic military posture this series has documented as continuing to develop. The Quantico training grounds language, the 6 veterans PSA response, the broader civil-military tension this series has traced as an active, unresolved dynamic rather than a completed historical episode. That distinction matters because it means this specific article's underlying factual basis could continue to develop and potentially strengthen or weaken based on future events, unlike articles addressing already completed foreign policy actions whose factual record is largely fixed at this point. There's also a useful point worth making about how this specific filing's timing, April 2026, positions it within the broader electoral calendar this series has covered extensively regarding the approaching midterm elections and the documented GOP anxiety about maintaining congressional majorities. Filing formal impeachment articles months before a midterm election serves a specific strategic function distinct from any realistic expectation of immediate procedural advancement. It creates a formal, citable congressional record that campaign messaging can reference. It gives base voters a concrete action to point to when frustrated with the pace of accountability efforts. And it potentially pressures vulnerable Republican incumbents to either defend or distance themselves from the specific conduct cataloged across all 13 articles. This series has documented extensively across our GOP fracture coverage how electoral considerations increasingly shape Republican calculations about their relationship with Trump. Larson's filing, regardless of its actual procedural prospects, adds one more pressure point to that already documented electoral calculus heading into the midterms. It's worth situating this specific filing within the complete historical catalog this series has now traced across our entire impeachment mechanics cluster of scripts because doing so provides essential context for evaluating exactly how significant this particular development actually is relative to everything that's come before it. This series has documented 2 actual completed impeachments with specific verified vote counts across both trials. The more than 70 lawmaker removal wave following the "Civilization will die tonight" statement, including named senior senators invoking both impeachment and the 25th Amendment. Al Green's earlier filing focused specifically on Iran war conduct, and now Larson's 13-article resolution building on his own party's earlier 7-article HRES 353. That's an extensive, well-documented pattern of repeated formal accountability efforts, none of which has yet cleared even a House floor vote, let alone approach the actual Senate conviction threshold this series has traced in such precise historical detail. Larson's filing represents the latest, broadest entry in that pattern, genuinely significant as a documented expression of congressional concern, genuinely limited in its realistic near-term prospects for actual removal. So here's the final complete framework worth carrying forward from this specific development. John Larson's 13-article impeachment resolution filed in April 2026 represents a genuine, serious, formally documented congressional accusation spanning foreign policy conduct in Iran, Venezuela, and Gaza, domestic National Guard deployments, and pardon power usage, building on an earlier 7-article resolution from 2025 covering obstruction, spending power, trade authority, authority, First Amendment concerns, and bribery. USA Today's own characterization of this effort as a long shot, combined with the specific detail that even Democrats aren't fully united behind it, provides the accurate, sober counterweight to any dramatized life falls apart framing. The Republican-controlled House and Senate make the combined threshold for actual removal. Majority House passage, followed by 2/3 Senate conviction. Extraordinarily difficult to reach. Exactly as this series has documented across every prior impeachment mechanic script, examining the same fundamental constitutional math. Trump's life hasn't fallen apart because these articles were filed. What's happened instead is more precise and, in its own way, more significant. A formal, permanent 13-count congressional record adding to an already extensive documented catalog, this series has traced across dozens of scripts, regardless of whether any of it ever produces an actual House vote. The impeachment process continues to grind forward, not as a sudden collapse, but as a slow accumulation of documented allegations that will outlast any single political cycle. And that, in the end, may be the most significant development of all.